So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the computer vision lecture this term. Computer vision is a very exciting topic because all of us use plenty of vision applications, and computer vision enables computers to see more or less or to understand things in images or videos. This course is an introduction to computer vision. And we will start today with the introductions, and then we will look into pixel images, which are the very foundation of computer vision, and we'll look at various operators. And then in the coming weeks, we will increasingly look at more high-level vision parts like regions of images, how to detect features, how to recognize objects. Convolutional neural networks are used quite a lot to do this. Transformer models are also slowly becoming more popular, but I think the vast number of vision applications based on neural networks are still convolutional neural networks. Transformers, however, are also discussed in the Outlook chapter, and then we'll also look at image sequence processing. And since there'll be a project, I'll say more about this later, you can also do a robot project. And for those of you who want to do robot projects, I'll also provide a little introduction into mobile robotics. Today, there'll be the intro, and so we have about 3 hours. We'll also have a chance to look into pixels and filters. And I'll start now with the motivation, and then we talk a little bit about the organization of the course, and then we'll start digging into computer vision. So computer vision is a very exciting field in computer science or AI that allows computers to get an understanding from digital images or videos. Most of modern computer vision is based on statistical methods, in particular machine learning. There are also other approaches, but we'll focus on the ones that are used most commonly, and that's largely machine learning. But in order to get to machine learning, we also need to look at some more low-level methods. All of you are dealing with computer vision applications all the time. And I'll talk about a few examples now. And in the meantime, maybe you can just submit a few other examples of how you deal with computer vision in the chat. And then once I've discussed my examples, I'll refer to yours. One is, for example, optical character recognition. So if you scan a document and you digitalize it, you not just want to have an image, but you actually want to have turn this into a proper understanding of the characters in it. Those characters that you scan, they could be printed before, but they could also be handwritten. So optical character recognition can turn out to be quite complex because all of us have a somewhat different handwriting, but you still want to recognize characters written by others. That's complex, and solving this or performing very well in optical character recognition, you need machine learning for, because machine learning allows us to generalize from some examples of handwriting to further handwriting. Then autonomous driving is becoming more and more popular. So we also use computer vision in there because of various sensors, including some cameras. We use face recognition to unlock our phone or in various safety applications or security applications. And you have submitted plenty of more examples here in the chat. I'll refer to them as biometric security. Yes, object recognition in photos. There are so many applications of computer vision in your phone, for example. Fingerprint matching, yes, that could be another example. Image segmentation, so you want to separate the background from other objects in an image. You can do this in Photoshop. In this course, you will also learn how to implement image segmentation. Then the encoder model in image generation. Yes, we'll also look a little bit into image generation in this course, and maybe this year more students want to do this in the project. Emotion recognition, analysis of medical images. So I think all of those are great examples And I have plenty of more. For example, you take a photo on your phone, and then you notice that probably after half a second or second, the image starts to look better because there's also machine learning in the background to improve the photos you have taken. So thanks for all these examples you have submitted to the chat. What I always do in the beginning of one of my lectures, and if you've taken one before, you've seen it, but there are also new students here today. There's the map of computer science. This was created by someone a couple of years ago, and I think it provides a very good overview about the whole field of computer science. And in the beginning of a lecture, I always highlight which parts we're actually looking at. So I've created a few boxes, and then I zoom in to actually investigate this better. So obviously, this course is about computer vision. We need image processing for that. Later, we'll see what's actually a difference between image processing and computer vision. Modern computer vision requires machine learning, and a lot of the methods in addition to machine learning that we use fall into AI. This course will also do robotics. And in order to speed up our training, when we build deep neural networks, we also use GPUs. So this is at least the most important boxes I would put into the map of computer science. So you see what this course is about. What I want you to learn in this course is we'll have an introduction to computer vision. We'll look into it in the context of AI and machine learning. And we'll look a lot into theory, but also applications. You will definitely work on real-world problems because there will be a project, and I'll say more about that soon. And what you're learning in this course, I want you also to be able to transfer your skills to new methods in the future because the field is evolving rapidly. And we'll also look at some current research problems and discuss where the field of computer vision may go in the coming years. In order to succeed in this course, you need a couple of prerequisites. Most of you who are taking this course are in one of our undergraduate programs in AI, either the German language program or the English language program, but we also have a couple of exchange students here or students who are in a different program. Maybe those of you who are not in one of the AI undergrad programs also send me a quick message in the chat, whether you're an exchange student, whether you're taking this course as an elective, when you're from a different program. But I guess most of the participants are actually from the AI undergrad programs. So you need coding because there'll be real projects. Ideally, you have written code in Python before, but for the project, you can totally pick the language and technology you want. Nonetheless, Python is something that most of us have come across, and it's certainly a very helpful one for problems in AI. You need a solid understanding of algorithms and data structures and mathematics. In this course, we'll be using methods from calculus, linear algebra, and statistics. If you struggle with some of these prerequisites, especially if you're maybe not from the AI undergrad programs, let me know. I'll be happy to help. There are a couple of primers into math topics that I've added in this course that maybe some of you have not come across before or forgot in the meantime. So there'll be a couple of quick revisions about maths in this course, like eigenvectors, eigenvalues, Taylor expansion, and this kind of stuff. And maybe I've seen before, but then you didn't need it again. And in this course, you'll need all of this. So there'll be a couple of math primers or revisions as well. So I see that from your messages, I largely got responses that you're a couple of exchange students. I know some students, they're also in a different master's program or a bachelor's program, and they're taking this course as an elective. The workload of the course looks like this. We meet 3 hours per week. For the first half of the term, there'll be lectures. So you'll learn all the essential theory you need, and then you'll start working on projects. So I'll be there for lab sessions, or you make an appointment with me in the remainder of the term. And at the end of the term, there'll be a project presentation This course carries 5 ECTS. An ECTS is a credit point, and a credit point is equivalent, 1 credit point is equivalent to 30 hours of work in average during the term. So the expected workload for each and every one of you in this course during the term is about 150 hours, because we have about 15 weeks this term. And that means most of the time you spend on this course is not sitting in the lecture, but it's actually doing revisions, maybe preparing for the course, and then obviously in the second half, work on your project. Most of the things I discussed there in the slide deck, but I also sometimes use my iPad to visualize a couple of further things that are maybe more interactive that we can develop together. That's why there's also a video recording. And as I said, there'll be a project in the second half of the term. You will be working in a group of 3 to 4 students. So not 2, not 5, not alone, always 3 to 4 students on a project of your choice. And as long as your project is related to computer vision, we can also do robot vision projects. We have plenty of robots available for robot vision projects, but a robot is not a must, it's an opportunity. And the project will also be the examination of this course, because I think in more advanced semesters, we should be doing more than just discussing theory. We should apply, this kind of stuff to real problems and not do the same coursework over and over again. And since the project is a major part of this course, it's also the examination. The schedule of the courses, we're starting with the lectures, and what you need to do is in sometime in April, probably mid to end of April, for those of you that want to pick a robot, I will inform you about the date when you can pick up a robot from the deep learning lab, and I'll also provide you with some insights about one platform that we're using from NVIDIA, the Jetson Nano platform, but more about that later. So we're doing lectures for the first half of the term. So we'll finish around end of April, early May with the lectures. We'll see how that goes. And sometime around early May, you need to finalize your project topic and briefly present it to me, but I will inform you of 1 or 2 weeks in advance when that takes place. And you will just briefly present your topic, what you want to work on, and I will give you feedback whether the topic is okay. And then during the term, you will work on these projects. And at the end of the term, sometime end of June, early July, we will have the project presentations on a weekend. I've already put the exact date in iLearn. I don't know it by heart. And very importantly, the project presentations, they will take place on campus on the dates I have put in iLearn. And they are only possible on campus, not online. Because if I offer an online exception, most students will probably come up with some reason for an exception, and I want to see you, talk to you about your projects, and I want you to present your projects to the others, and that's why we have a weekend at the end of the term where we'll have enough time to look into all of this. And those of you who have picked up a robot obviously need to return it after the projects. So this is the schedule for the course. We will also have a guest lecture later in the term from a company that builds professional computer vision software. Concretely, that's MVTech. They give a guest lecture in this course every year now, and they present some of their professional software and how to use it, because many of us use open source software, but there is more than open source. And that's why I felt MVTech is the right partner for giving that guest lecture. And they've been doing this now for the last 2 years or so. And every year the presentations are terrific. And they'll show you how to use their software to build real computer vision systems. And once you do your project, you can use any software you want. If you want to use MVTech software, we also have a campus license from them. But we'll talk more about that later during the term. It's not to advertise MVTech, but they're just a good partner, and they've been giving great guest lectures every year. So I'm very happy to continue this with them. There's also a marking scheme for the project and how long your presentation should take place, but that's now far away because the project presentations are at the end of the term. So I'm not talking about the marking now. I'm just talking briefly about the schedule, and that's what I have done. In this course, there are various books that are helpful for following up, for doing revisions. A very classic book about AI is Stuart Russell's and Peter Norvik's book, AI, A Modern Approach. We're taking some sections from there. Then for deep learning is something that we're using a lot later in this course. There's a very good book from Goodfellow, Bancho, and another author. But the book appeared, I don't know, like 7 years ago. So meanwhile, deep learning has evolved. It's still a very good book. And actually, some of the things we're discussing from computer vision, we're referring to this book. But now there's a new book from Chris Bishop and his son. The deep learning book, it just appeared before Christmas. And Chris Bishop wrote a very popular book around 2007 or so, I think, which is called Pattern Recognition and Machine Learning, which is, in fact, my favorite machine learning book. It's a tough read, but provides very good insights. And exactly that style is something you'll find now in his new deep learning book, which just arrived before Christmas. So when I went on my Christmas vacation, I took the book with me and actually read it during my winter vacation, which was a Christmas vacation. It was a very good read. So if you want the latest references on deep learning, maybe Chris Bishop's book can be a great reference. But then we need a little bit more than learning in this course, because we need to also deal with digital images. We need to process them, do some manipulations in them. So there's a very good book that I like a lot. It's Digital Image Processing by Gonzalez and Woods. The book is also something I'm referring to a couple of times. You don't need to buy these books. I think that course is quite self-contained, but if you want to have further readings or do an additional revision, probably these books are quite helpful. But there are more references, and I've included them in the course. These are the exact references of the books. And if you look at last year's recordings of this course, you're wondering what has changed. As usual, there are various minor improvements in the course, some small improvements here and there. And one topic that has become more popular since last year is vision transformers. So transformers are very well known now from large language models like ChatGPT, where the T stands for transformer. But that kind of architecture can also be applied to vision, and those are vision transformers. And we're discussing them in the Outlook chapter because they're becoming more and more popular. I think there was 1 or 2 groups last year that picked vision transformers also for their project. Maybe this year there are more. And that's why I have also updated that topic, also with regards to the new deep learning book, because a new deep learning book contains quite a good explanation of vision transformers. And that's why I have added a few slides on vision transformers, specifically based on a new deep learning book. So it's something you will not find in the old deep learning book from Goodfellow and others, because when it was published a few years ago, there were no vision transformers yet. So those are the changes to the previous year, and we'll start with a little motivation now, why computer vision is so important, how the field intersects with others, also some challenges that computer vision is about. And I feel that computer vision, this is not my figure, I found it on the internet, but I think it describes computer vision quite well. So computer vision is about understanding things in images or videos. We need image processing. We need to recognize patterns. So machine learning can be one way to find patterns. We use some methods that fall into AI, like machine learning and a couple of others. We need mathematics, obviously, maybe some physics. but not too much in this course. Mainly we use physics for our vision robots. But then there's also a big intersection between computer vision and signal processing. And in signal processing, you would use a lot of filters and kind of stuff. We are just using a little bit of signal processing in this course. We will look into filters, obviously, for image processing, but not too much from a signal processing perspective, which is more continuous. We'll look into a discrete way to process that. So we use image processing techniques, and then we use machine learning. So we're not really using these continuous methods from signal processing. If you take, I don't know, a computer vision course, say in an electrical engineering department, the methods taught there, they may be more from signal processing. But since we're in a computer science department and teaching this course in the context of a AI bachelor's, we're focusing also on computer science and maths and machine learning and AI, not too much on the signal processing perspective. So again, if you take a computer vision course in an electrical engineering department, the methods discussed, they could be quite different. And there are a couple of image processing tasks that are important, because I said before, we also need to look at the difference between computer vision and image processing. The way we use image processing in this course is largely as an earlier step in our pipeline. So some preliminary tasks, like maybe remove some camera blur, remove some motion blur, maybe enhance colors in images, or remove certain defects such as scratches or other noise, improve contrast. So those are methods, they're not really from computer vision. It's more something like in terms of pre-processing. And this is how far we're using, or this is how far we are concerned with image processing in this class, because in any image, you can improve the contrast or remove blur or remove defects. It has nothing to do with computer vision yet, because computer vision is a later step with more high-level features. But in order to do that, we need these earlier pre-processing steps. And we're also looking at some image processing today in the next chapter. But for computer vision, we have sort of more high-level tasks. For example, we want to assess an object for quality, so automated quality inspection. We want to break a picture into different parts. And if you have maybe some more computer vision tasks that are coming to your mind, send them to the chat before you send some use cases and things for which you're using computer vision every single day. But if you have some more tasks now in mind, feel free to send them to the chat and we'll be discussing them after I discuss those examples with you. Maybe you want to determine the type of an object in a picture. So you take a photo and then you want to determine, for example, what kind of object is in there or which objects. You can also create a 3D representation of an object. So that would be stereo vision, for example, using multiple cameras or using the same camera and taking multiple photos. From that, you can reconstruct a 3D representation from this 2D representation that the camera took. Sometimes you want to extract a line from an object, or you want to make some reasoning about a scene to find some hidden properties. All of these could be typical computer vision tasks. Didn't get anything else in the chat from your side, but if you have any more tasks that are coming to your mind, feel free to send them any moment. Now, what I also want to discuss is computer vision and computer graphics. They are often two fields that are mentioned together or that they somehow correlate. And I want to make in this course clear to me what computer vision and computer graphics is about and what's actually their difference. So in computer vision, we take an image and we want to find some hidden properties. For example, we want to detect an object, we want to reconstruct something. So we have the image, I want to find a different properties in it, like from these tasks. And there are many ways we can do this. For example, we use a neural network or other methods. And we have these scene parameters. So our scene that we see, there's illumination, we have a camera, there's certain angles, and we have an image that we take from that scene. I'm going to find out something in the image about the scene. And computer graphics does something different. From computer graphics, we have that scene, or we have our properties of the scene. So we describe certain objects, certain angles, illumination, and from that description, we render an image. So we create a visualization of that scene in order to visualize it. But in computer vision, we take the visualization, so we take a photo, and then we want to find out these hidden parameters. So we can say more or less that computer vision is actually the exact opposite of computer graphics, because in computer graphics, we want to render a scene, so we want to visualize it. And in computer vision, we take a visualization, say a photo, for example, and then find out some hidden properties about the scene and sort of find some of these parameters. So it's more or less exactly the opposite. And while computer vision looks really cool to use in apps, you have all these apps now, you know, that make you older, younger, or whatever transformation of an image of yours. Building computer vision systems is tricky. And we'll look at a couple of challenges today. And there are plenty of questions you need to ask when you're building your computer vision system. So what kind of information are you looking for in the image? Or is there any prior knowledge that you can assume or that is required to recover the information? Or is, how shall we present the required information? So on prior knowledge could be if you have a controlled environment, say in a factory, you have a controlled environment, and then you do a quality check of an object like a bottle or a piece of metal. And there, some prior knowledge could be, well, it's metal or it's a bottle that you're looking at, and you can control certain scene parameters. For example, the distance between the object and the camera. Maybe you can create stable light conditions in a box or something. Knowing this kind of stuff in advance will make it maybe much easier to build your computer vision system than if there was an arbitrary distance or if there was arbitrary illumination. And for example, you can make some assumption about this following use case. Say, assume you get photos, and what you know is all these photos are taken in a forest where there are trees, but there's also a house in the image. And you want to sort of distinguish the house from the trees. So you can obviously have some prior knowledge then, because you know all the images that are put in a task are houses or trees or both together. And how can you separate them? And if you have very straight lines, well, that's an intrinsic characteristic of houses, not trees, because houses are very straight, trees maybe not. You could make some other assumption, for example, about colors or shape. Or if you know you have photos in which there will be land and sea and you want to separate them, so for example, satellite images from the coast, then one assumption you could make to separate these two parts is you can say, well, if you have uniform reflectivity, that could be an intrinsic property of sea, but not land. But again, depends on your use case. But if you can make some assumption in advance, this may make it much easier to build such a vision system. And now we see computer vision can be tricky, because looking at such images is even tricky for us. What you can see in this image is a vase in black. But some of you may see something different first. And if you know what, or if you have seen something different first, maybe send it to the chat and let us know what you have seen first instead of the vase. And we got the right answer, two faces. Yes, so these are the noses, the mouths. So even for us as humans, this is ambiguous. So it could be quite tricky for a vision system. Or this one here is, what I see is a young woman. The young woman, this is her ear, this is the nose. She's looking in this direction. She wears a hat. Do you see something different than a young woman in that image? Many of you have, or some of you may have seen this image before. I think it's quite popular. If you've seen something different than a young woman, send it to the chat, please. Yes, it's an old lady where this is the nose and this is an eye and this is her mouth and she's looking in this direction. So it's again ambiguous. You have seen these two examples definitely before, or many of you. Here I have a more complex one. I have an image and you see humans here and there's some reflection and there seems to be a spaceship. This is what you may assume if you see this image for the first time. Take a look at it. Maybe don't take a look at the next slide. One says it's a boat. What could be happening in this image? Please, without looking at the slides that I uploaded. So there's a suggestion there's a boat somewhere. And we got someone says there's a water reflection. Someone says there's a car drowning. And if you just rotate the image by 180 degrees, actually it becomes much more clear. Because here in the left image, it looked like, well, these are humans. There is a spaceship and there's a reflection here in this lake of the humans and the car. But in fact, it's different. The humans are actually standing here. So this would be the ones down there are standing there and there's a reflection of them. And there's actually a car sinking in this lake. But just rotating the image could actually make a difference. The first one, it really looks more like a spaceship or a boat. But then if you rotate it, it becomes more clear. If you feel that this image was sort of confusing, maybe just send some reaction here in Zoom, maybe, you know, some green sticker or something, if this is something that confused you and you didn't see the solution at the very beginning. So when I saw quite some reactions from your side about this. So when I saw this the first time, I felt it was quite confusing for the first few seconds. And then I thought I put it here in the slides because it can be a good motivation for this course. Or here we have bread, but we also have a cat that just looks more or less like this bread. Same shape, same color. Obviously, a cat has eyes and a mouth, but distinguishing the cat from the bread could be quite difficult with a vision system because you would need enough training data or enough assumption about the environment to make that. And then we also have this example here. There are muffins, but there are also dogs. You as a human, probably for you, it's easy to distinguish most of them. Nonetheless, these muffins, they have quite something in common with the dogs because you have these eyes and a nose. So this here is the muffin, the first one, but the second one is a dog. And what could be happening if you have only dog images like that, and you train a vision system, and for example, to distinguish dogs from trees, for example. Then you put in training data of dogs and trees and maybe a few other classes that you could come up with and more data. But it could be happening if you don't have muffins in your training set and a class muffin, and then you classify those images. It could be happening that your muffin is actually classified as a dog. So you maybe need more diverse training data dogs from maybe or other kinds of dogs from different angles and so forth. And then maybe your data set would be more representative, because like this, it's quite biased. And this is something that is sometimes reported with vision systems, that they start recognizing muffins as dogs or monkeys as whatever. You've heard about all these cases. And then often what you hear is there are claims of discrimination, but it's often just that the data was biased, and then the system also learned a biased model. That's something we don't want. So make sure your data set is representative, especially if you have a very, like an uncontrolled environment. I don't know if you have a controlled environment like a factory, probably you will not run into such issues, but uncontrolled environments, just photos out of the wild, this kind of stuff can happen. And similar things have happened in the last few weeks with these generative vision systems, and those unfortunate images that were created and spread in the news, as you may have heard about. So biased data sets are an issue in machine learning. Now, in computer vision, there are 3 levels of vision. There's low-level vision, which is about edges, corners, depth, also the optical flow. What the optical flow is exactly, that's something you'll see in a couple of weeks. But these are very low-level features like edges, corners, depth. Then we have intermediate level vision, for example, regions or contours for certain parts. And then high-level vision is about objects and various other hidden information. In this course, we will look at all 3 levels of vision. So what we finally want is high-level vision systems like object recognition and all this kind of stuff, which is really cool. And many of you will build high-level vision projects later in this course. But in order to actually be able to detect objects, we need to start with lower-level vision. We need to think about edges and corners and contours and regions. If you use deep learning architectures, you may have to worry less about low and intermediate level, and you can try to learn this from the data. But deep learning is not a silver bullet to all vision problems. They are helpful for some, but certainly not for every possible problem. So we also, in this course, I not just want to discuss deep learning to directly work on high-level vision. We also need to investigate low-level vision and then intermediate-level vision. What you will sometimes see in my slides is there are some slides with a lot of text. I'm not reading out these slides. These slides are largely there just for your revision. If you want to revise what I have just said or get a few extra explanations, sometimes there are slides with a lot of text, but I don't read them out. Then we all learned, or all of you learned, let's say in a biology class, how the human eye works. And I think the human eye is a masterpiece in evolution, because we as humans, we tend to see very well, a lot of very different settings, and we combine them with our brain, are able to understand a lot of very complex scenes with very different illumination and lots of different objects from different angles. And we just need a few examples to learn quite well. And how the eye works exactly is something you learn in school. So this is not a biology class. So we're not discussing this or revising this in detail. I just think the human eye, and combined with the brain, is really a good system for vision. And we as humans, we excel in so many vision tasks. Now we want to build artificial vision tasks, and we will see that actually computer vision is quite challenging, and computer vision is far from being solved. Even with these very nice vision transformers, they're also not a silver bullet. They're helpful for certain problems, but they come with many new challenges. So computer vision is far from being solved, and I don't think it will happen anytime soon. And there are a couple of reasons why computer vision is challenging. From a very generic perspective, in computer vision, we are actually working in a domain where we have an under-constrained inverse problem. So probably many of you are wondering, what is an under-constrained inverse problem? First of all, it's an inverse problem. So most of computer vision is about an inverse problem because we have 2D images and we want to understand something about the 3D world from these two images. And concretely, an inverse problem is the process of calculating from a set of observations the causal factors that produce them. And we just have a limited number of 2D images, and 2D images, they are a loss, or they contain a loss of information from this 3D world. We want to make some assumptions about the 3D world from 2D images. So it's an inverse problem, and under constraint means we have a limited set of images. There is a limited number of assumptions we can make about the process, how the images were generated, and what the 3D world looks like. So computer vision is challenging. And I think this is probably the most generic problem in computer vision. It's an under-constrained inverse problem, but there are obviously many factors that contribute to that. Images are noisy, and noisy means that there are shadows, there are reflections in images. Sometimes you have a lack of focus in an image. You notice when you take photos with your camera on your phone, if your focus is not right, the image may be blurred or just not look well. Sometimes there is motion in images, maybe because you've moved your camera a little bit too far when you took the photo, or an object was moving. So all of this can lead to noise. The images are blurred for various reasons. So shadows, reflections are a problem. Then obviously illumination contributes a huge challenge to computer vision, because if an image is under illuminated or over illuminated, that's an issue. If there's illumination towards your camera, you often have a problem, but all of you notice when you use a digital camera. Then there are other appearances of objects. So if you have an object, you not always have the same appearance in your images, because the object may vary in terms of the shape, the size, its color, together with the pose and lighting conditions, because the image may be from a certain angle, and in a different image you may have a different angle, or you just may not have enough images of that object in various poses. So all of this contributes a major challenge. Then it's believed that image understanding requires cognitive ability. We're not building cognitive systems that work like the human brain, but we're building artificial systems. So they somehow need to understand images or learn something useful in images. And then we are also interested in robot vision in this course. So for robot vision, you need robotics and control. So in robotics, a challenge is often the massive data rate. So you have, say, a camera on a robot, and you have more than 20 images per second. So there's a massive data rate. You may have real-time requirements because you need to react very, very quickly in your robot, and you cannot wait 10 seconds to take an action. So all of this contributes more challenges. Robotics and robot vision is just a minor part of this course, but those of you working on robot vision later in this term, feel free to take a look at that as well. So these are some challenges in computer vision, and in this course we will see how to build vision systems and then how to address these challenges. Now we have finished the introduction, and obviously we're not done for today because we got plenty of time today. I want to know from you if you have any questions about this course. So about the intro I just gave, or about the organization of the course. Maybe not too many questions about the projects yet, because for the projects we first of all need to advance a little bit with the content. And then once we are advancing towards chapters 6 and 7, probably you will also start having more ideas for your projects. So I got the answer that there are no questions from you so far, and the course was also called helpful by a student. So I think that's good. Will be helpful for all of you. And now we got a question in the chat. So yeah, please go ahead with the question and send it here in the chat. You're anyway always welcome to turn on your microphone and ask a question. But you will be recorded then. And there was now a question about the project. I said in these projects, it's 3 to 4 students for a project, so not 2, not 5. So at least 3 people, and you need to connect with the others, but there are enough opportunities. If you need to find group partners, you can connect in our forum. I have created an opportunity there because I want you to work on bigger projects. So if you work with others, this will help you to build a bigger vision system. And every year I see fantastic vision systems that are built by the students, and most of them probably would not be built if it was just a single student working on them. So if you're working in a group, you can help each other to advance. Good. Now we have finished the introduction, and we can continue with chapter 2. We will look concretely into digital cameras, and digital cameras create digital images. So we have a digital representation of an image. We'll look at what this looks like. And then we will look at noise in images. Noise is a huge problem, and we'll see maybe how we can try to filter out some noise, but there are other filters as well, not just denoising, but plenty of other filters. We'll look at them, and we will see a little bit how we can use filters to detect very simple edges. And then we have a very good foundation for all the remaining courses, because all the remaining for the remaining chapters, because in the remaining chapters we assume we have a pixel image to do something with it, and maybe we assume we have edges. So it's good if we start with this early on. A digital camera works quite different to the human eye. We've seen the human eye briefly before, and in a digital camera, we are doing a discretization. So discretization means we have our continuous image and we are turning it in a somewhat discrete representation. And there are actually 2 directions for discretization. So imagine we have some element in the real world in our scene that we are taking a photo of. In order to be able to take a photo, we also need illumination, because we don't just want to take a photo in the dark. And we're illuminating the scene element. We're taking an image, and then we actually have a discretization here in our output image. One discretization is the pixels, because we have a matrix essentially. Say we have 100 times 100 pixels, or 1,000 times 1,000 pixels, whatever. So we have a discretization in terms of the shape of the object, because this continuous object cannot be fully represented as is in our discrete representation. So the shape somehow looks a little bit simplified, because it needs to fit on our grid. And then what we also see is in our scene element, we have also a continuous change of intensity. So here it's quite dark, there it's quite light, but we have this continuous flow sort of in terms of the intensity. And our pixel images, they also need to have a concrete value. And what we typically use is we use integer values from 0 to 255 in each pixel to represent this, where the 0 typically means black dark, and the 255 means completely white. And so we work with a grayscale in between. And since we need to map this continuous intensity to a discrete intensity, we have a second discretization, which is actually that intensity, because we need to somehow map this to an integer between 0 and 255. So we have 1 byte per pixel, and that's the second discretization. So our pixel image is a simplification of the real world. And the second, and another another simplification is this is obviously 3D and it's mapped to 2D, so to discrete. And then this shape is discrete as well as the colors or the intensity. We will largely deal with the methods in this course with grayscale images. There are also some opportunities for color images. Depending on your project, you may be using color images or not, but most of the methods we'll deal with, they assume grayscale images, but there's also a very easy way how you can convert your color images into grayscale images, but we'll see that later. So our images are represented as matrices. And a matrix is something I typically denote in bold in an uppercase character. So this capital A in bold represents my matrix. The matrix represents an image. Concretely, I have m many rows and n many columns. And each entry, like A00, is a pixel value. And this pixel value is typically, as I said before, a byte, which is between 0 and 255. So my matrix could be 1,000 times 1,000 or 20 times 30, whatever, depending on my use case. So this is at least the standard representation of a digital image, just a matrix, the most common one used in computer vision. Those are grayscale images, but you could also use color images. And in color images, oftentimes you have 3 channels. So you have 3 matrices, 1 per channel. You have a red channel, a green, and a blue channel in the RGB color model. There's another one that is the CMY color model for cyan, magenta, and yellow. And in each of these channels, you have a value from 0 to 255. And this is how you can blend red, green, and blue, or in the other model, the other 3 bases colors, in order to have a concrete color in a pixel. But if you've ever used Photoshop or some other even simpler tool for processing images, you have seen the RGB or CMY model. Then there are other models that I just briefly talk about in this course, because as I said, we are largely dealing with grayscale images in this course, but there are other models to working with color images. So you have the RGB model, and for example, you want to have a green color, so you need to mix. You can just take the green one, but if you want some, say, brown color, you need to mix them in some way. And then maybe you want to make it a little bit more brown or a little bit more yellow. Then it comes quite difficult. It's quite difficult how you need to mix or blend these 3 channels in order to make a pixel a little bit more brown or yellow or whatever. That's why there are other models that often look something like this. For example, the HSI model. And in the HSI model, you have, first of all, an H value, which is called U. So we see this angle here is the U, the H. And it starts from red, and if you increase the angle, you get into the yellow, then the green, then the blue, magenta, and so forth region. So H would just mean how much you're rotating in the circle. Then you have the S, which stands for saturation. And saturation means, well, simplified, how strong you want this color, maybe from a very light green to a very strong green. You would increase S. And then you also have the intensity to make it more lighter or darker. And if you increase the intensity to a very high value, would just go up here in this cone and you would just have a white pixel. Has any one of you ever seen something like HSI or a variation thereof, for example, in Photoshop or in Preview on a Mac or in other applications when you can manipulate images? If you've ever seen something like this, maybe just send a green sticker or something here in Zoom. So quite some of you have seen this. So if you've ever tried to manipulate pixel images, you see something like the HSI model. There are variations. We'll look at them. So hue, saturation, and intensity. And they have the benefits. Say, for example, you have a green and you just want to make it sort of more green. You would just increase hue. But you can do other things. For example, you have a green and you want exactly with that intensity and with that saturation, make it a little bit towards yellow. You would just move the H parameter. And I think manipulating colors in that scheme is much easier than in an RGB model, because in an RGB model, it's just not obvious how you would be able to make an image a little or a pixel a little bit more green or something, because if you just increase green, there's a blending in it which make it more difficult. We also got a student who sent a comment in the chat. I'm just reading it, but there is an explanation for pixel discretization. But those of you, but there's no question. So what you wrote makes sense, but I'm not reading it out now because it's quite a long text. There is a variation of this HSI model. There, for example, let's call them HSX models. For example, HSV, so huge saturation value, HSL, hue saturation lightness, HSB, which is hue saturation brightness. Sometimes these models work like that you just have a single cone, not two cones, or some other variations. But we don't focus too much on color images. So if you're curious about the exact differences between HSI, HSV, HSL, HSB, and so forth, just take a look in the literature. For example, this Gonzalez book I mentioned before discusses this in further detail. What I also said before is how can you actually convert a color image into a grayscale image? One way you could do it, for example, in RGB. So in RGB, said we have three matrices. We have a red, green, and blue channel. You can just add these three channel values and then divide the sum by 3. This is one way how you're just removing the color and turn it into a grayscale image. There are also all sorts of equations how to convert from RGB to HSI or from HSI back to RGB. The conversion between RGB and CMY is much easier, in fact. But if you have an RGB image, you can just add the red, green, and blue channel and then divide that sum by 3, and then you have a single matrix, and you have in that matrix the grayscale values. So if you take a look into books like the one about digital image processing, they contain all these equations, how to map between RGB and HSI and back and forth. But in practice, you would not just re-implement these equations. You would be just using a library. So there are plenty of Python libraries for working with digital images. as well as libraries in other languages. And there, all of these equations are implemented, so you don't need to do that from scratch. But if you're curious how that works, take a look into the literature. Now there's a very famous color image that has been used all over the literature. It's called Lena or Lena. And I'm curious if you have ever seen this image before, because you sometimes find this in computer vision books or websites. If you have ever seen this, again, maybe some thumbs up or something here in Zoom. And I'll see if any of you have ever seen this image. This image is often used as an example for computer vision problems, for example, to detect edges or to do some kind of segmentation or whatever. For that, maybe you would first then say for edge detection, convert the image to grayscale. It's a standard test image widely used in this field. In fact, the photo has an origin that many of you may not expect. This image comes from a Playboy magazine in the 1970s and actually goes further down, which is now not part of this course or not part of computer vision books. But the image is actually much bigger from that magazine, but sort of the top was used in the early days. I don't know why people picked it, but it sort of seemed to be interesting, especially for edge detection, because you have here this hat and all of this stuff. But in the last few years, there has been a movement to sort of, with the aim of eliminating this image from the computer vision literature. If you're curious to learn more about the book, about the image, you can also look at the Wikipedia article where I took the image from. I'm not using this image a lot in this course, so there's also not much to eliminate, and I also don't like just eliminating it for no reason, because I think there's nothing wrong with this image. You may see this image at a couple of occasions in this course, simply from standard resources I have tried to include that simply use that image. And there are just a few examples now where we get to see this image again, but if you look for more computer vision literature, probably you'll see the image again. Noise is a big problem, and I discussed noise before, and there are various reasons for noise, for example, illumination or some data processing issues. And what we see here in this image here, this is the image from just before, converted to grayscale. How to convert to grayscale is something I just told you before. And what we see here is it's a 3D plot, and the plot is actually an intensity plot. So we have a matrix, which is something like 23 by 33 pixels. So it's actually just an excerpt from the image, not the whole image, but just a part of the image. And what we see is for every element in the matrix, we have an intensity value, which is between 0 and 255. And we see it's visualized here. So this is a 3D plot. We see overall it looks quite clean. So there is a more bright part to the left end and right end. And then, because these are values around 150 to 200 or something like that. And then we have lower values, which are darker. So it's important, this is not the whole image, but part of an image. The image overall looks quite clean, not noisy. And now you can add noise. One noise or one type of noise that is quite common is the salt and pepper noise. Salt and pepper means you just take your image and you sort of spread salt and pepper on the image and you spread it out. And then we see all this noise here, all this disturbances. And then we take the same excerpt in the image and we actually see it looks much less clean because you have all this noise in it and it looks far more complex than the one before. And noise actually makes processing of an image in computer vision quite difficult because In low-level vision, we care about finding, for example, edges or other properties. And all of this is often based on changes of intensity in an image. So if your image is very clean, it's very easy to detect, for example, edges or lines or whatever, because they're just changes of intensity. So an edge could be just around his head, for example. But if we add all this noise, it becomes more difficult because it's more challenging to find changes in an intensity that are reliable. So one approach could be trying to wash out the noise, which doesn't work perfectly, but we can try to improve the image by removing noise. And for this, we need filters. And I will now also change to my iPad and visualize what all of this is about and how such filters work. So I'm stopping the screen share and I will continue with the screen share on my iPad very quickly. So what I'm showing you now is also written like this in the slides, but I find it helpful if I slowly develop these equations here and don't just show you the slides up front. So we have a pixel image, which is just as discussed before. And we have, for example, row I and column J. So we care about this pixel here. And what we know in this image, there's salt and pepper noise. So some of the pixels are affected with a value that is too bright or too dark because of this salt and pepper noise. And I want to wash the image or sort of clean it by taking advantage of a so-called local average filter. The local average filter works like this is, I want my image, so this was image F, which has noise. And I want a new image G, which has the same size, so the same number of rows and columns. And also visualize this G, I, and J. Which is more or less from what we had before. And I take my image F at that point IJ, but not just from there, but also from its environment around or the neighborhood. So what I want is, I want a neighborhood, which I call omega IJ. And the neighborhood is are the pixels around pixel IJ. So for example, so I have my pixel IJ, the neighborhood could be all these pixels, maybe even including our pixel. So the neighborhood could be just the immediately ones around it, including our own pixel. So the neighborhood IJ is a set eventually. And I want to go through the set. And in the set, I have 2D coordinates, MN. I go through the set of all the pixels of the neighborhood of IJ, which will include our own pixel as well. And I want to sum them together from F. So MN here comes from the neighborhood, and I go through all of them. The neighborhood, as I said, could be just the immediately ones around, including our pixel, could be more around it. So the neighborhood could be larger. It's up to us how we define it. we go through this neighborhood, we sum up all these pixel values. Remember, it's grayscale images. So, and then I want an average, and I divide the average by W, and W is just the number or the size of the neighborhood. So here the neighborhood could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So here I would divide by 9. If the neighborhood is larger, I would divide by that size. So I'm just building an average of our pixel and the values around it, summing it and dividing it by W. And then I write this into my new image G. So this would just be stored in there. So image G is an image in which I have taken image F, and for every pixel in F, I have calculated the local average, and I have stored all the local averages in G. But it's very important when I work on G, I always access F. So in order to calculate G, I never use the neighborhood in G, because this would already be the local averaged pixels. I always take, when I sum up the pixel values from F, which are the ones I have not updated yet. So that's very important. Otherwise, it doesn't work out very well. So this is my local average filter. The equation is written in a nicer way in the slides. And can also go back to the slides and see this again. This is just the equation we had looked at. And here it's just written in a nicer way. And omega ij is the neighborhood of our pixel ij. We can see how this looks when we apply it to our data set. So we have the image from before. It's the Lena image, which is affected by noise. I wash it or sort of clean it with this local average filter. We see the noise becomes less important, or losing some importance, less sharp. And then I take that image and I apply the local average filter again. So the noise is losing importance, but something else is happening in the image. Do you see what happens in the image if I start applying the local average filter and then I apply it over and over again? Something else happens in addition to the noise being removed. And if you see that, maybe send it here in the chat. Details are lost. That's true. And the image is more and more blurred, so it's less detailed. And if I apply this 10 more iterations, it will be totally blurred. And then obviously detecting edges in it is also more difficult, because edges are a change of intensity, and changes of intensity are blurred by applying the local average filter. So don't apply the local average filter over and over again, because it may help in a little bit in the beginning to get rid of these very sharp edges or these very sharp noises like we see here. But if you do this over and over again, the image just becomes totally blurred, and it will also be useless for further processing. There are many more filters for doing local averages. There could be a thresholded local average, meaning maybe we only look at certain pixel values within a certain threshold in the neighborhood. We could have a weighted local average, so that maybe some pixels are more important than others. If you do that, you could, for example, say one of the neighborhood pixels is more important than the other. So all of them have maybe same importance, but one has a higher importance. Then you also have to update W. Say before we said the neighborhood is 9 pixels, but now 1 pixel has importance 2, while the others have importance 1. Then you need to divide by 10, not by 9 anymore. Then such an averaging here is more affected by very strong noise. We could also think about the median filter, So not just an average filter, but a median filter, which is maybe less affected by noise. That's something we could be doing, and so forth. What we are doing here with these filters, so we've just looked at the first filter, the local average filter. We're in fact doing something that is described in signal processing as a one-dimensional convolution. And a convolution is something that comes from signal processing, and it's a more general filtering scheme. It's defined in terms of two functions. We have a function chi, which is the filtered signal, so the result. We have f, which is the original signal, and we have h, which is the convolutional mask. Concretely, that's a probability density function. Such a one-dimensional convolution can be written. We can say chi is our filtered signal, so the result. We have our original signal, and we apply this convolutional mask. So we apply function h to f. And this can be written out as an integral, which is an integral from -infinite to +infinite. We have our function f, the original signal, at u times h of x minus u along the variable u. This is not about a pixel image, it's just about a one-dimensional source. So you could imagine that this is just a pixel image which has one row and multiple columns. If we want to work with a matrix signal, so our digital images, you could write out such a convolution also in a two-dimensional way. I will not read out this integral now, but we see with these two integrals, we're able to describe this in 2D. But this is something you would be focusing on in a signal processing class, or if you take a computer vision course, maybe in an electrical engineering department. But we're in a computer science department, so we don't care too much about these integrals. And what we're doing will actually look much simpler, because this is for signals that are continuous, but we actually work with a discrete signal. So our images are discrete. For this, we can eliminate the integrals and actually work with sums, which will make it much, much easier. If you are more curious about more general convolutions from signal processing, take a look at Wikipedia in a corresponding article. This is explained quite well, and there are some good visualizations. There are other resources as well. I think this is also explained a little bit in the digital image processing book from the references before. These 2D convolutions, they can also be described in a discrete way, but in fact, there is a representation that is much better for us that we'll be using more often. So I will not discuss in detail these ways how you describe a convolution in terms of integrals or sums. There's a far better way. These filters, they can actually be described just like this. And you're probably wondering what that means. And for that, I will go back to the iPad and show you that kind of this kind of depiction for the filters. This was just the local average filter, how we described it in a sum, but we can also just write it like this. And, well, maybe just write it as a matrix, as in the slides. And this matrix here is a 3x3 matrix, which contains ones. And what it means is, if I apply this to a pixel, say I apply this matrix to our pixel up here that we had before, then I take into account our pixel, which is this one, which refers to the blue one. So there, I take the upper neighbor into account, which is the one up there, the lower neighbor, which is the one down there, and so forth. So what I'm describing here is how much I take the neighborhood into account when calculating this. Because with our definition before, we had a neighborhood, but we had to define it. And here, with this matrix representation, I'm defining the neighborhood. And I'm saying it's a 3 by 3 neighborhood. In the center is my actual pixel. And I take that one and the 8 ones around it into account with the same weight. And I finally need to divide by 9 because I need to sum up those 9 pixels, and they all weight 1, and I divide by 9. I could change this, for example, with a different matrix, which is something like this, say 1, 1, 1, 2, 1. So the center, our actual pixel, has the doubled weight, so I need to divide by 10. So this would be another local average filter, which is in fact weighted. And this kind of representation or visualization of a filter is the one we'll be using throughout this chapter, because it's a very convenient visualization. We use a matrix to visualize how much we take our pixel and its neighborhood into account, and by which factor we need to divide. Now comes one part that is confusing, and I have to say, I also don't always use the same terminology throughout the course. What we have called a filter or a convolution has many different names in the literature. I've talked largely about a filter or a convolution, but sometimes you find other terms like a kernel, a mask, or an operator, or other terms. They're all synonyms. So what we saw here is a filter, a convolution, a kernel, a mask, an operator. The term convolution means something else, as you saw. It's this, which comes from signal processing, but it's largely being ignored throughout the course. We just look at these discrete representations, and all of these terms, convolution, filter, kernel, mask, and operator, are just synonyms for us. And now that we've looked at this matrix representation of our local average filter, we can look at more filters. And this strange image is one that I found in Wikipedia, and I use it here because overall, I think it's quite a common image, and we can do various manipulations on it. We can use the identity matrix, or this matrix is called identity. It's obviously not an identity matrix from linear algebra. That one would look different. But this matrix is called the identity. And what I do is, for my local averaging, in fact, I'm just taking my pixel value with factor 1. I'm not taking the neighborhood into account. So the factors for the neighborhood are 0, because I don't look at them. And the factor in front, so this factor that I had before, by which I had to divide that sum, or that weighted sum, is just 1, because I'm just taking a look at my pixel. So this is my image, and I apply the identity to it. It doesn't change anything, because for each pixel, I just take that pixel, and I don't look at the neighborhood. This matrix is the one we have just seen before, and we called it a local average filter. Sometimes it's also just called a box blur or blur, because I'm blurring by just taking this local average. So we're washing out some noise like up here, but we are also losing, or we're adding blur, and we're losing edges more and more. So we're also losing details. And there are other kinds of blurrings. For example, a Gaussian blur 3 times 3, which is inspired by the Gauss function or distribution. We see this one here. So our pixel has a high weight 4. the immediate pixels to the left, right, top, and down have factor 2, and then the neighbors in the diagonal have factor 1. So we say our pixel, the most important one, the ones up, down, left, and right, they are important, and least important are the neighbors in the diagonal. And if we sum all of this up, we get to 16, so we need to divide the sum of products by 16. The literature proposes other Gaussian blurs that look at a larger region around it. They still do a blur, but they look at a bigger neighborhood, but still our pixel has the most or has the highest importance. So I go through that, and if I sum all of this up, I see I need to divide the sum by 256. But these are very common blurs, Gaussian blur, 3 times 3, 5 times 5. I can also do something different. I can do just the exact opposite of blurring. I can sharpen. And sharpen means I take my pixel with factor 5 and I subtract, for example, the neighbors to the top, bottom, left, and right. Because finally 5 minus 1, minus 1, minus 1, minus 1 is 1. The factor is just 1 in front, so I don't need to divide by anything. But I'm subtracting the neighbors to the top, bottom, left, and right. Now I'm asking you, what happens if I blur an image and then I sharpen it again? If you have suggestions, what happens? Send this to the chat. I want to have a discussion, or turn on your microphone if you have a suggestion. I first blur the image and then I sharpen it. Do I get my original image or not? Still waiting for your responses. Or no, and that's correct. There's obviously a loss in information by doing the blurring. So just blurring and sharpening doesn't get me my original image, because I lose information by doing the blurring. These are not inverse operations. They sort of have an inverse effect, but I'm unable to undo a blurring by sharpening. You can try to implement this just for fun. You can have an image and you can blur it and sharpen and then do this sequence of operations 1,000 times, and probably sooner or later the image will totally fade. Feel free to try this out as a little exercise. And there are plenty of Python libraries for working with images. So doing this in a few lines of code should not be challenging. So now we've seen these filters or convolutions, masks, whatever we call them. And we will now look into edge detection. And in edge detection, the goal is, we're still in low-level vision. And in low-level vision, we will include, or we will work with a variety of methods that aim in finding something or a feature in our digital image. Concretely, edges are typically something we get from a change of illumination or brightness, and low-level vision is very much focused on finding edges, or it's one of the tasks. Because edges are a simple feature, and they can help us to find more high-level features later in this course, or when we build more complex vision systems. So this is the beginning of a lot of vision tasks, and we'll look at some simple ways how to detect edges. It's a fundamental tool in computer vision. If you, for example, use a neural network, you don't need to do edge detection oftentimes on the images. You can just learn edges as a low-level feature on your own, and then increasingly more complex tasks in a neural network. But that's something we'll see in a couple of weeks when we look at neural networks. But the first phase of, say, convolutional neural networks, or the first few layers, they also just start learning low-level features like edges, but we'll see that then. And since there's more than just deep learning in the real world, we also need to study how edge detection works. This one here is a very famous image, and it's actually a complex scene. So we have this girl here. She holds a flower, and in the background we have some bushes, but they're a bit blurred because there's a distance, so the focus is on the near-term objects, the girl and the flowers. And what I want to find in here are edges. So first of all, we convert this color image, say, in a grayscale image. And from there, we need to apply certain operations so we can find edges. And these edges are then something that represents a change of contrast. So it could be some later, this could be, for example, some contour or some other feature of a more high-level object that I want to find. And the question is, how can I find such edges? And this is something we will discuss now. Again, there's a lot of text here. Ideally, or in an ideal world, all of this would be very simple because we only have one object or one focus. But here it actually is complex because we have more objects in the background and they are blurred. So we sort of want to ignore them because we also have a change of contrast in the back or in the background, but we don't want them. And here we see actually all this hair. So there are a lot of edges. And this will actually make this task more complex than we would think. Edges are important, and there are lots of problems I've mentioned already. Like we have this girl with the focus on, but if there was now a change in depth, say that, for example, the hands of this girl are more towards the back, or she holds some bigger object which is leaning towards the background, then the edge detection would already get far more complex. And I saw there was a question here in the chat, why we are unable to do a blurring and then a sharpening and get the original image. Well, because we're taking our image and we're applying our local average filter to every pixel in it and then have our new image. So each of the pixels is just a local average of the neighborhood from the source image. And there we lose information. We are unable to undo this. We can sharpen, and the image will probably look in the first attempt relatively close to the first one, but yet there's a loss of information. So these are not inverse operations. And feel free to implement it and try it out on your own. If we only did that maybe with a single pixel, we could try to reconstruct it, but we have applied that operation to all the pixels. And then we're applying on this new matrix where each pixel has been processed through the local averaging. If we apply sharpening there, we will not be able to fully undo the blurring. But feel free to implement it. And I think the answer that we got here in the chat from the other student also addresses it quite well. And there are more challenges to edge detection. For example, discontinuities in surface orientation, maybe changes in illumination, changes in material properties. Maybe we have an object and the illumination keeps changing on that object, which could have severe impact on edge detection. So edge detection is something that looks quite simple to the human eye, because we as humans, I think we can find the edges here extremely well, where we want to automate that, and then we see it's actually not that easy. And there are different edge detectors that we are discussing today. We're starting with simple ones and then get to more complex ones. And eventually you need to make some assumptions in those edge detectors, but we'll see that. For example, we may need to set thresholds. A threshold could be set so we only take these front ones and not the ones in the back because they're maybe not that strong. So you need a threshold and say from here we take everything and everything else we don't take. So setting the threshold can be complex. There are plenty of other challenges, and we'll look at a couple of sample images now and we will wonder how we can actually detect edges in them. One of the simplest edge detectors is a so-called Sobel operator. And the Sobel operator uses two filters, or here it's written kernel, or convolution, mask, whatever. And we're calling those, so we have our source image A, and it's a grayscale image. And we now calculate two matrices from that, Gx and Gy. We take our image A and we apply the filter to the image. Important, this is not a matrix multiplication because A could be 100 times 100 or 1,000 times 500 pixel image. And then we have this kernel or filter or mask, whatever. So it's not a matrix operation, but here it means this star or multiplication means we're applying this filter to every single pixel in our source image. Like we have done before, we have looked at one pixel where we applied our filter to it, and we're applying that filter now to every pixel in the image. And what we are doing here with this filter is, so we say we ignore our actual pixel, but we take the pixel to the left with factor 2, plus 2, and to the right, factor minus 2. And for the upper and the lower neighbors, we take the upper left neighbor and the lower left neighbor with factor 1, and the upper right and the lower right with minus 1. This is the filter we're applying, and what Gx actually gets us is the gradient along x, so a change of the intensity along x. And we can do exactly the same with Gy, which it's just rotated more or less, and Gy gives us the change along the y-axis, so a gradient along y. And we can try to, well, we can try to look at this from, I'm just skipping a few slides because there's a good example. So what we actually have here is our image. Later, the Sobel operator will give us these edges, but what I care about is we have our image, and here we can see how these gradients along x and y are going. So we see some changes in the x dimension and some changes along the y dimension. And this is what we have just calculated. In order to visualize them, you may need to normalize them, but it doesn't matter for now. So Gx gives us the change along x, and Gy gives us the change along the y-axis. These Sobel operators for Gx or these parts of the Sobel operator, Gx and Gy, they're written like this. They can actually be calculated in a smarter way by decomposing these Sobel kernels into two kernels, but that's something that we don't care about now. So this is only an optimization. It's also described in the books in case you care about an efficient implementation, but it doesn't give you something else. And now we have this change, or the gradient along x, the gradient along y. And now I want to calculate the actual edges, so the overall gradient, because the gradient means a change, and what we need here is the change of intensity, but we're working with a grayscale image. So I can calculate G by taking the pixel value. So this is now for each pixel value. I take the pixel value in Gx and I square it, the corresponding pixel value in Gy, I square it, and I take the square root of that. And what it gives me is the change of intensity in that pixel, and I apply this operation to every single pixel in the image. What I can also wonder about is in which direction does the intensity change? And I can calculate the change of intensity for every single pixel in the image. And what I need for that is actually the tangent function But in order to make sure that we get the correct angles, I need a function that is called a tan2. And I'm asking you if you have ever seen the a tan2 function, maybe with a thumbs up, thumbs down here in the chat. You can let me know if you have ever seen this. We see one person who has actually seen a tan2. For the one who has seen it before, maybe let us know in the chat what you have used it for or where you have seen it. I'm just curious because typically most students don't know the a tan2 function. The a tan2 function comes typically with maths libraries and programming languages. So a tan2 is also available in Python in the math package. And one student said, and one who used it is he saw some angle calculations in C++. Concretely, it's in Python in the math package. And the a tan2 function is a 2-argument arctan, because one question here asked if about arctan in the chat. And concretely, it's an angle measure between the positive axis, x-axis, and the ray from the origin to the point. So it gives us an angle between this ray from the point or from the original to the point and the x-axis. And you're probably wondering, why do I need the arctan2 function? Because with the arc2tan function, we can make sure we get the angles correctly, because calculating them, you have various special cases depending if x or y is greater than 0 or less than 0. And this is all done by the arctan2 function for you, so you don't need to worry about it. The a tan2 function came initially with Fortran in the 1960s in order to simplify this angle calculation. You feel free to read up how the a tan2 function works exactly, or just use it in a Python library. I think the Wikipedia article is quite okay to explain it, because there are, as I said, special cases depending on x and y. And you can obviously calculate this without using the a tan2 function. But if you do it, if you just use it, all these special cases for you are handled. And with this calculation, you get an angle per pixel. So per pixel, you know in which direction the gradient or the change of intensity goes. And if we apply the Sobel operator to a sample image, like this one here, so this is from some machining setting, we convert the image first of all to grayscale, and then we apply the Sobel operator, and then we get actually a quite good edge detection. So we see these screws here, we have an edge detection, this machining part. Maybe let me know, maybe you can turn on your camera, not your camera, so your microphone, or right here in the chat. What do you think about the result image? What's maybe caught well, what's not caught too well in terms of the edges? If you have any suggestions. While I wait for you, I'll mention some of my observations. What I see is, well, all this Sobel operator, like most edge detectors, they are sensitive to the illumination. We see there is some reflection here on the screw. And then where we have this reflection, it looks like there's another edge, but in fact, it's just metal and we have a reflection. So if the screw was made of a different material, maybe we wouldn't have this reflection and we would have less edges here. So reflections are mentioned. I think what also notice here is down here, we get a lot of tiny edges, but we just have a lot of reflections and some damage down here. And on these, on here, we get a lot of edges suddenly, which I think in the image generated by the Sobel operator looks much more, or I notice it much more than I would have noticed in the original image. What one student also noticed, there's a pipe that is over here, and the pipe is almost lost. So for the pipe, we only have a very small edge, very little, while I think in the original image, we as humans, we can notice the pipe quite well. But I think overall, the pipe is quite dark. There's this reflection here. For this reflection, we actually get more than for the actual edge. So it's not perfect, but I think overall the Sobel operator is quite something you can easily implement. I'll show you soon some code examples of how to use it, but you can also easily implement it on your own. It's just a little bit of code, and you can also skip this A2 or this A10-2 part, because all you need is this one eventually, because we don't care here about the exact direction. We just visualize our image G. But yeah, we got various comments from you. One student also says the edges with the largest contrast are the priority. Yes, for example, here, this one is super strong. And the ones with low contrast, we barely see, like the pipe with all this noise here that actually becomes quite visible. Now, you've seen now how the Sobel operator works. And what we noticed before today, when we looked at noise, we also wondered how we can get rid of noise, which was the local average filter. But imagine you apply the local average filter to something like this to maybe wash out this noise. You will also wash out the sharpness of these contours here. And then eventually the edges you find, they will also be far less visible. So it's a compromise you need to make. These ones here are super visible. I think they look great. They're better edge detectors than the Sobel operator, but the Sobel operator is a very simple one, and it actually gives us quite a reasonable result. And this is the other example we had already quickly looked at before. So I have this grayscale image, and I applied a Sobel operator to it. Maybe, again, tell me, also turn on your microphone if you wish. You're most welcome. You won't be identified who you are. So this will not appear on YouTube, only your voice, or sent here in the chat. What you think about the result of the Sobel operator applied to this image, and we get the result here.
Yes, you can hear me? No?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I can see it so far. Super operator, I think it's doing well. It's still showing a lot of details, but maybe the bike, the wiring is showing more than the metal.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that right or not.
Yeah, I think the bicycle, the wiring is super visible, but there's a huge contrast simply, or a huge change of intensity here between the wires and the background. So we see it also depends a lot on the background. What else do you think looks good or doesn't look good?
I think the tube, the reflection is taking like edges also, but while it is just one tube, it looks like a tube inside the tube, something like that to me.
Yes, and I think that's why I also picked that image in the first place, because here we have these massive reflections in the image, but this creates lots of edges that actually don't exist, because the only edge is at the top and bottom here. But the noise or the illumination generates all of these edges, so this would make further processing quite difficult. Anyone has any other comments, or you have maybe more comments? I don't know. I think the lock looks great. Down here, this part is not too great, but simply has to do with that we have little change of intensity down here. For the bricks up here, it looks far better. The one student, the front wheel disappears. Yes, there's not much left of the front wheel. Well, this is probably the front wheel and some here, but overall there's not much left from the front wheel, but probably also due to the nature that it wasn't very visible on the first image. One student feels that the perspective is lost because the background shouldn't be that detailed. Yes, that's also true, because here we have no thresholding or anything like this. And I think one of the most impressive ones is the wiring here, or the lock. I think the lock looks great. At least this part of the lock where we have the, I don't know what that is, maybe the keys or something. I don't know what it is exactly. But yeah, perspective is somehow lost. I agree. These are the ones we looked at before. These are the two helper gradients for X and Y. So that's what they would look like if you visualize them. And you can also use this very easily in Python. There's a library skimage. Has any of you ever used skimage? If so, maybe thumbs up or thumbs down if you have not used them before. So some have used it. It's good. But most have not. If you have used any other libraries for dealing with digital images in Python, feel free to share those libraries with us here in the chat. And what we're doing in this example is we just apply some of these filters, and I will quickly walk you through the code so you see what we're doing. So we use skimage, we use various filters from there. We also want some data. So there's a camera image that we'll be using. We will also compare some images, maybe a helper function later, but this is a camera image. We'll see what it looks like. One student says he mainly used OpenCV. Yes, which is also a very common computer vision library that you can also use through Python. And then we need a few helpers like NumPy or Matplotlib for visualization. And we use this camera image. I think the wording in here in this library isn't too great, because if you call a camera function, more looks like maybe you're using a camera on your computer or whatever. But this is just you're creating an image. And then we apply the Sobel filter to it. And there is a different filter that is a bit related to Sobel. It's the Roberts filter. So you can just call filters.sobel, filters.roberts. And then we have all this clutter code just for creating some subplots and visualizing this. So we just want to visualize the Roberts and the Sobel image and visualize it. So we just skip this, and there was this original image of a person standing here at a camera, and the Roberts detector delivered something like this, and a Sobel edge detector delivered something like this. I think they are quite similar, slightly different, but they work. They are not too different, in fact, these two detectors. We've only discussed Sobel now. Roberts is also easy to discuss, but I felt we also want to do more challenging stuff in this course, so we only discuss one of them. And anyway, later probably you won't be implementing these simple edge detectors on your own, so you would just be using libraries, and this is one way how you use them for pre-processing. Because edge detection is typically a pre-processing step, and from there you'll take the images and you will then find edges, and edges are a very simple initial feature, and then maybe groups of edges where you can use edges to find straight lines in an image. That's something we'll be doing in the next chapter with various methods like the Huff transform. You use edges, and from there you'll find straight lines, and straight lines could be a very good property in certain computer vision use cases. So now you've also seen how to do this in Python. If you have never used skimage, feel free to use skimage later for an experiment on your own images. And there are obviously more complex edge detectors than just the Sobel or Roberts one. remember this very complex image from before where we had this girl holding these flowers and we had a blurred background, so the focus was on the girl and the flowers. And there are edge detectors for such cases. And one is, for example, the Kenny edge detector. We'll not discuss all the equations of it because it would be quite lengthy. But I'll just tell you the intuition about what the Kenny edge detector is about, and then we'll look at a few examples and how to use it. First of all, you apply a Gaussian filter to smooth the image in order to remove noise. We've seen a Gaussian filter earlier today. Then we want to find the intensity gradients of the image. We've seen intensity gradients today for X and Y, so you know how to do that. But then the Kenny edge detector applies a non-maximum suppression technique to get rid of spurious responses, so to get rid of noise. And then it applies a double threshold to determine potential edges. So we want to eliminate edges maybe that are too invisible, and maybe we don't want to make sure that super strong edges take, all the visibility later. So we may also want to constrain it to the top. And then there's a little bit, probably the most complex part. We want to track edges. This in order to build the final edges and get rid of the final noise and the edges that are too weak. How this works exactly, feel free to read the original paper when the Kenny edge detector was proposed. I think last year or 2 years ago, there was someone doing a project who actually implemented a Kenny edge detector from scratch among other detectors as a showcase. And explained this in detail to us, how it works. Could be a project, I don't know. It doesn't always need to be high-end neural network projects. Some projects may also focus on low-level vision with some with their own focus, so that could be done, maybe not the majority of projects. And if we apply the Kenny edge detector to our image, we would get something like this. There are some pros, there are some cons. Maybe, again, if you have any comments, if you compare this application of the Kenny edge detector to our image, what looks better, what looks worse than the Sobel operator? If you have any comments, again, you can turn on your microphone or share this in a chat. I'll be happy to discuss this with you. Now, I'll give you a moment to think about what looks better, what maybe doesn't look better.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I think, yeah, Sobel operator looks better, much better. There is still a lot of details somehow, like the tube on the right. It was showing somehow. Here it completely disappeared.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think somehow in Super Operator I was understanding what is the image looks like, but here I barely connected that it is a machine or it is some tube.
Yeah. Well, there are various reasons why the result doesn't look too great, because in the Kenny edge detector, we are also defining these thresholds. So we need proper thresholding for this to be reasonable. So it's a little bit of trial and error. You've mentioned plenty of things that don't look good, like maybe the pipe has now totally disappeared. Maybe here we have a little bit less noise than before, but these ones here these edges are also not complete. But maybe another pro would be these edges are not, or all the edges are more or less the same thickness now. They're not super strong edges compared to very thin edges. Maybe that's an advantage. I don't know, could be. So there are differences, but with Kenny edge, we can at least set these thresholds and then try to make this work better, but it's trial and error. compared to Sobel, where there's no thresholding. If you're curious about how to use the Kenny edge detector, you can again use SK image, and in the SK image there's the feature module, and there's a Kenny edge detector, and here you just pass one threshold, which is for how wide the Gaussian or Gaussian filter in there is. I think there may be more parameters, or if you look into computer in OpenCV, for example, there are more parameters that you can pass. The code here is just we create a noisy random image, which we don't need to discuss now in detail. I'll just show you this in a moment. And then we are applying the Kenny edge detector. Feel free to look up the library if there are more parameters available, or in OpenCV, and then you could apply this to your image and sort of fine tune. And again, here, this is one of the challenges in computer vision that I mentioned earlier today. We need to make certain assumptions about our environment. So maybe if you find a good setting for the Kenny edge detector in terms of the parameters, and your illumination changes, it may not work anymore. So that's something you actually see quite often in computer vision systems. The illumination changes, maybe the performance of the system goes up and down as well. What this code here, you can obviously also try to implement it on your own, does is we have a noisy image. So we have a square that is rotated, and on top we have salt and pepper noise. And then we apply our Kenny edge detector first with the sigma parameter of 1. We get something like this, which really doesn't look good because this noise around here is just too messy. But then we apply a different Gaussian filter, and then actually it works quite well. The noise here doesn't matter. We get rid of it, yet the edge overall looks quite reasonable. While this example here is obviously not too great, I admit that, but it's also something you can try out maybe on the weekend, get a few sample images and apply standard libraries like SK image on them, try to experiment with that filter or with other filters and see how they work and how you can fine-tune the parameters. There are obviously not just Sobel, Roberts, and Kenny edge. There are more detectors for features that I don't read out here. It's just a list, but we could spend a whole semester just on edge detection because there's so many edge detectors. But we want to do more high-level vision, so we just use these low-level vision libraries for now. But feel free to read up on them or take a look in the book in case you're curious about more of these approaches. And more of them are also implemented in SK image to work with them. So we have done now quite a lot today, and we have 30 minutes left. The lecture today is not officially finishing at 3:30. At 3, we're actually finishing at 3:30, but at 3, Professor Meyer will come here and briefly say a few words about your degree program, because he's in charge of one of the undergrad degree programs, and he'll say a few words about how to choose electives in the future, because some students want to know this early. So he will come around 3. So we have half an hour left. So we still have a little bit of time for further content, but I would suggest we're doing a 5-minute break, and then we'll continue with regions of images and segmentation. So see you soon. The break. Now that we've looked at the very foundation of images, digital images, which are pixels, and we've seen how to manipulate these pixels, we can continue by looking at regions of images and segmentation approaches. So we go a little bit towards intermediate vision. And concretely, we will look at segmentation. We will see what segments are and how we could maybe advance segmentation. For segmentation, there's also some concepts in psychology, perceptual grouping, and Gestalt theory, which doesn't come from computer vision, more comes from psychology. But depending on your vision use case, you can make some assumptions based on that. We will look at segmentation approaches, and it turns out we can use image segmentation quite well to compress images. And we will then already have a little bit of an intersection with machine learning, because we can see a machine learning-based image compression approach that is essentially just based on image segmentation. But we'll see that later, probably in the next lecture, not today anymore. The goal of segmentation is we want to identify groups of pixels that fit together. What means fit together depends on the use case. It could be color, it could be some other property. So we want to separate images into these coherent segments. We could maybe call them objects, but they're not really objects as such. It's just parts of the image that fit together based on some property in the pixels. It's often a pre-processing step. We've seen early pre-processing steps just before those filters, and then maybe segmentation is another pre-processing step for other processing tasks in computer vision. And this could be, for example, a binarization. A binarization is a very simple segmentation approach. All I want to do is I want to separate objects from the background. So I have this medical image here. These are cells. I have some unhealthy cells, probably cancer or something. And I want to separate all these objects from the background, because I have some color in the background, some bluish background. And what I care about is just separate me the images, the objects from the background. Do you have any suggestion how you would approach this task without looking at the subsequent slides? I have a color image. How would I do binarizations, or meaning separating all these objects from the background? If you have any suggestion, maybe just turn on your microphone and share your ideas with us, or maybe share something in the chat. I'm curious to see how you would approach that. You got a hand raised? Please go ahead.
Yeah, maybe it could be the same as in Hollywood, where they use green screens or blue screens to add or separate the things. Maybe the same basic, yeah, something like maybe.
Yeah, we could do that. That's fine, but then you need some extra screens and hardware. And maybe just for this image, so without any extra hardware from Hollywood, you have a pixel image, and as that, it's just, three. There's a color image, so we have 3 channels, red, green, blue. And how would you binarize this one to get this one? So without extra hardware from Hollywood. We got a good so what you said about Hollywood, obviously this may be totally reasonable, say in a different use case, but we got a very good suggestion here. And the student says, if the pixel value is below a certain threshold, we make it 0 or 155. First of all, we need to probably convert this to grayscale, but grayscale, I've said already, For each pixel, we just sum up these 3 channels and divide the sum by 3, and then we have a single channel or grayscale channel. And then obviously the background is not perfectly white. The background has some bluish whatever color, but probably the intensity is quite low, maybe 10 or something on a scale from 0 to 255. So we could say there's maybe a threshold like 30, for example, and everything under 30 becomes 0. Everything 30 and above becomes 255. And like this, I can do my binarization. Which threshold I need to pick totally depends on the use case. So it is not just one threshold for all possible problems. But if we can make some assumption about the lab or the device where this is carried out, or the microscope, then I can probably easily set the threshold and can do my binarization. And the binarization could then be used as a pre-processing step, and later I take this one here and maybe I take very large cells, and those are the cancerous ones, and the other ones are maybe the good ones. Maybe the very small ones also have cancer, so maybe the very small ones and the very big ones are the ones that have problems, and the average size ones are okay. Now this could be then my computer vision task. But we see the binarization is actually not that difficult. And you've already seen this SK image library that allows us to load images. So maybe just try to implement this on your own, a binarization. It should be just very straightforward. You just go through the image, or if it's a color image, convert it to grayscale, and then go through the image, and for each pixel decide whether it's above or below the threshold. And then you convert the ones under the threshold to 0, the other ones to 255. And you have done your binarization quite easy. Segmentation can be, or is also key to autonomous driving. It's one of the pre-processing steps. So we have a car driving autonomously here. There's a camera, and we have this scene. And what we see here are the various segments. So we see there's a house segment. We have this one here, which is somehow the fence, the road. What we see here is more than segmentation, because a segmentation, first of all, is only a separation of regions that, or pixels into regions that fit together. Classifying them is a different task. So what we see here in the result is we have the segments, but the segments also got classified. So this was classified as a vehicle, a building, but we don't care about the classification yet, because that's something we'll do in object recognition in a few chapters. But in order to do the classification, first of all, you need to do the segmentation. And segmentation here could also be done maybe based on color. So this is not a grayscale image, but maybe we want just pixels to fit together that are somewhat similar to each other compared to others. Maybe this would give us this car. It would give us this car, which are red and yellow, but the windows could be a challenge. These buildings have totally different colors. We also have some plants here, which are more greenish. So maybe a segmentation could just work on colors and try to find then our segments that fit together. So we have the road, the sidewalk has a somewhat different grayscale. And then we have the segments, and obviously later the segments need to be classified, but this doesn't matter for now. Now, again, there's a lot of text for those of you that want to read what I'm saying. The human eye, I think, is really good in partitioning scenes into meaningful segments. We do this extremely well, but we also make certain assumptions, maybe based on color or how near objects are to each other. And what we are doing is, in fact, some kind of perceptual organization or perceptual grouping. We see things and see what fits together and what doesn't fit together. And I think we as humans, we do this extremely well, and we learn from just a few examples, or we learn very easily. I just see this with my little kids of how quickly they learn, also in terms of perception. And it's a challenge because each scene we see, we will never see it like this again in that illumination, in that viewpoint. But we can generalize very well. And based on maybe certain psychological assumptions we make, over the year, like in the late 19th century, a theory was proposed by a philosopher called Christian von Ehrenfels, and he called this Gestalt theory. So in that time, German was a language of science, but those days are gone for long now. But that's why. But in English, you still talk about Gestalt theory, and what its assumption is about is saying something like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So we have parts, but if we sum them, we get more as a whole than if we just have these individual parts. And the Gestalt theories, if you want to learn in detail about it, maybe go to a psychology class where this is discussed. But there are some examples of how people perceive things. For example, we may perceive that this line here, just highlighting it, appears longer than this one, but in fact, they just have exactly the same length. But we also look at the outer context. We look at these parts, and if they are opening to the left and right, we sort of assume that this was longer than this one, where we close at the right and left. But there are other strange phenomena for the human eye. For example, many of us may think that the distance between these two straight lines is longer than between these two straight lines, but they have exactly the same distance in the upper and lower image. It just depends heavily on the context, on what they are put on, if they are put on this diamond-like structure, or if they are put on this structure that is closing and opening again. But these are just illusions. There are phenomena. And this was studied in the past, and Mr. von Ehrenfels then coined this Gestalt theory and came up with various laws. And now you're probably wondering, why is this psychology stuff relevant to computer vision? Because some of these laws, they are probably quite helpful when you build a computer vision system. If you can make, again, some assumption about your scene and your environment, and you may want to, and you have maybe some control over the scene and the environment, and then you could make some assumptions and try to build your vision system based on some of these properties. There's a law of proximity, which says something like that elements that are closer, they tend to be perceived as one entity. And we have this example here. So we have this matrix structure. In total, we have 16 squares. But we notice that in the vertical, these squares are closer to each other and they are separated in the horizontal. So here we have 4 of them in this column that are close. The next column, we have them close. And we sort of assume, or we perceive, that these squares, they sort of belong together here in a column, but that the individual columns are different to each other. So we sort of perceive this as 4 groups. Then there's the law of similarity. We often tend to group by similar objects. So again, we have this matrix structure here, and we have squares, we have circles. But to me, somehow, when I look at that, it looks more obvious that in this row we have a group, and in the next row we have a group, and the next row we have a group, rather than if we had groups in the columns. So it appears to me much more reasonable that I would group here based on similarity, not based on a different factor. I don't know how you see this, but I think to most humans, it's far more obvious that we would probably group by similarity. And now there are more laws that I'm not discussing here, but you can look up this Gestalt theory. And these are certain rules from psychology, and they can be quite helpful when processing images or when doing segmentation. Because depending on your use case, you make some assumptions, what fits together, what doesn't fit together. And then probably you could maybe, depending on use case, go back to this Gestalt theory. There are obviously many other approaches to segmentation, like coloring. We've looked at this before. You can nowadays also use neural networks that try to do segmentation as well. So you can use neural networks not just for classification, they also work extremely well for certain segmentation tasks. But depending on what kind of computer vision systems you're building in the future, maybe this Gestalt theory could be helpful when you do some segmentation. Then there are many different segmentation approaches. And there are numerous techniques. What we can say is there are more or less two approaches that we look at now. There are some that are merging algorithms and others are splitting algorithms. And the merging algorithm would mean you start with single pixels, for example, or single entities, and then you try to merge them into larger segments depending on if they still fit together based on certain properties. And at some point, you have built large segments, but you cannot merge them further because they just wouldn't fit together anymore. They are too different. So this would be sort of a bottom-up approach, but you can also just go the opposite direction, a top-down approach, which is a splitting approach. So you take a whole non-uniform region and you try to split it into more uniform ones. And those ones you have split, you try to split again until splitting doesn't make much sense anymore because they're overall then quite uniform. There are also combinations of merging and splitting. And again, one challenge is in your use case, you need to define what's the uniformity criterion. So you would need to define as an expert what actually fits together on what metric and what does not. And we can now look at a segmentation approach, which is a histogram. And with a histogram, we can actually try to get some summary statistics of our image. And we can, I'll start showing you this. For example, we have our image here, which is this leaf. And in our image, it's a grayscale image. We have a lot of very white pixels, as you can see. This is largely the background. And then we have not totally dark pixels, but more dark ones, like around here, and the leaf overall, but not super dark ones. And the histogram is a summary statistic of that image. What we can do is we can go through every pixel and we try to make a bin for the pixel value 0 to 255. So we would count how often does a pixel of value 0 appear, how often does a pixel of value 1 appear, and then sum up, and then try to visualize this as a plot. We'll see, yeah, there are a lot of pixels which are relatively close to 255, relatively white, which is the background. Some, which is this big sharp one here. We have dark pixels, which is here, or darker ones. Probably those ones here are the darkest one we can see, which is probably the end of the or the left end of the of this hump. Then we have some other pixels in this leaf, which are quite white, but not as white as the background. So these are the ones here. And this could be maybe this part of the histogram. And the histogram can help us also to do segmentation, because we could say, well, let's try to split this. We could try to split it by saying, well, I want the super white ones in the leaf. So maybe I take all pixels that have a value in this range. Then I get exactly what the second image here shows. So this edge sort of this leaf, because it's relatively white, but not as white as the background. Then the other hump would be this one here. So we could say, well, this is the core of the leaf because it's much darker than the background. So we would probably get the left image. And then everything else is the background. And the background would be largely this one here, around this big hump as of here. And we would say, well, these are the super light pixels. That's the background. And we got a very good question. How does segmentation handle shadows? And this is where the problem starts. Imagine it's not just a leaf, but a taller object. And the illumination is, say, not from the top, but from the side, say from the left. Then you would have a shade over here. And this would definitely ruin our segmentation approach. So the segmentation approach here from the histogram we have looked at only works well if I have a controlled environment. If there are shadows in it, probably it doesn't work very well. Unless we could visualize it and maybe see the shadow is dark, but maybe has a different darkness than the object, then, well, we could try to split it, but it will definitely complicate our task. And we have this image here. It's just a histogram from before, and we add some noise to it. Again, salt and pepper noise. Salt and pepper noise will severely complicate all of this, because if we look at the histogram, it looks completely different. I'll give you a second to think about the histogram and what you think about it. And I want to give you a little bit of time to think about it and maybe share some of your insights then here in the chat, or maybe you want to turn on your microphone to discuss this with us, what you think this new histogram shows us. If anyone has an idea, please send it to the chat. What I notice is, first of all, the scale of the y-axis is different. So here the maximum was 1,800. Here it's 2,500. And what we see is, well, we don't have this very sharp part of the distribution at the end for the background pixels anymore, because we have done the salt and pepper noise. So we also have more white points on here, while on the white background, we also have some dark dots. So actually, it's become much more difficult to separate using this histogram, because now, before we had these two humps, which were super different. And like this, we could do also with the third one here, we could easily do the segmentation from before. But now this becomes much more difficult because these two humps are far less distinctive. And if we try to do a segmentation based on that, it won't really work well anymore. And if I do a segmentation of dark pixels, it would visualize me only the dark pixels in here and not where I have the white noise on it. Same for the background. If I separate the background, probably I can only separate the white pixels very well and not the dark ones. So the segmentation has become quite difficult. And there was also a question of how lighting can impact all of this. The question was before how shades or shadows would affect all of this. And now if the illumination looks different and is focused on the center of this leaf, but around it, it's dark, we also start to see, well, it's getting difficult because we have a lot of very dark pixels suddenly, not many quite white pixels anymore. So it ends around 190 or something. And doing segmentation from here will again be very difficult based on intensity, because if I try to separate dark ones, I'm not just separating the background, it's totally blended with the leaf, as you can see here, and only trying to visualize the very bright ones would be this one, but it doesn't give me a proper separation or segmentation anymore. Last thing for today, I will soon stop the recording and give the floor to Professor Maya, who will say a few admin things. If you take a look into schedule of next week Friday is a holiday. So next week Thursday there are officially no lectures, but I want to speed up a little bit with this course. So I'm offering that we can do the lecture next week live again at the same time as today. And you can join because most of you will probably have anyway time because the holiday is only on Friday, and it will be recorded as usual. This is my offering. If anyone disagrees, maybe send a reaction now in the chat, but the sooner we speed up with the content, the more time you will have for your projects in the second half of the term. So it's definitely to your advantage if we speed up a little bit. And that's why I'm offering we do this. I even see thumbs up. So there's plenty of, there's agreement and no disagreement. So we'll do it this way. And there will be a recording anyway if you don't have time. So we're done for today. And I'm stopping the recording here because Professor Meyer's part will not be recorded. It's unrelated to the course.